Okay, close your eyes for just a second and picture this. You're standing out on the dusty plains of Moab. The scorching desert wind is at your back, and right in front of you, just across the Jordan River, lies the horizon of a brand new era, a promised inheritance. You are literally standing on the edge of history. The stakes here, they absolutely cannot be overstated. You're about to step into a reality your ancestors only dreamed of, and the absolute authority of the living God is just hanging in the air. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're stepping right into one of the most dramatic thresholds ever crossed by humanity, and we're going to see exactly how this ancient turning point sets the ultimate stage for our own redemption. Standing before the people is Moses. Now, this is the guy who stared down Pharaoh, the one who stretched his staff over the raging Red Sea, the man who trembled before God at Sinai. But he's an old man now, and he knows a heartbreaking truth. He isn't crossing that river with them. You can really hear the pastoral closeness, that fierce urgency in his voice, when he pleads with a generation about to inherit the promises. He says, remember who brought you here. Remember what happened to the previous generation. Do not imagine that your future depends upon your own greatness. You see, this isn't just some cold list of religious rules. This is the urgent heartbeat of a shepherd, pleading with his flock right before he departs. Standing at the threshold. Okay, let's dive into this timeline. Because the people standing on this plain, they're not the same ones who saw the plagues of Egypt firsthand. That first generation largely perished in the desert. This new generation, well, they've grown up on stories. Incredible miracles, sure, but also tragic failures. 40 years ago, we had the great deliverance from Egypt. Shortly after that, the miraculous dividing of the Red Sea. Then came 4 decades of wandering, the wilderness classroom. And now, today, they're standing at the threshold. The overarching warning here is absolutely huge. You've inherited God's promises, but you have to be incredibly careful not to inherit your parents' unbelief. Extraordinary experiences just do not automatically produce a faithful heart. The Great Wilderness Classroom. We often think of the wilderness as just this massive, dry detour, right? But it was a profound place where God intentionally stripped away comforts to reveal the true state of their hearts. Listen to the piercing truth of Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. He humbled you, allowed you to be hungry, and fed you with manna, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread only, but man lives by everything that proceeds out of Yahweh's mouth. God wonderfully provides, he leads, and he sustains. But the wilderness also exposed a fatal human flaw. The very second life gets uncomfortable, our human confidence in God's character just spectacularly collapses. And this brings us to the sheer creative absurdity of human rebellion. I mean, it's actually kind of wild what we can convince ourselves of. At Kadesh Barnea, they feared earthly giants more than Almighty God. They literally made visible, temporary circumstances bigger than an eternal promise. And let's be honest, we do this too, don't we? We have this remarkable tendency to romanticize our past rebellion. We take the exact same idolatry that destroyed our ancestors, but we think, oh, it's perfectly fine for us because we've brought it into our homes and dressed it up with better furniture. We try to build this ridiculous theological buffet, taking a little bit of Yahweh, throwing in some worldly practices on the side, as if God is somehow grateful for our spiritual variety. It's absolute foolishness instead of offering him our wholehearted devotion. A flawed human mediator. You see, despite his monumental greatness, Moses was a flawed human being. Let that sink in for a moment. Whenever things went wrong, Moses was there. They complained, he listened, they rebelled, he pleaded with God for their lives. But because of his own disobedience at the waters of Meribah, he's forbidden from entering the promised land. The greatest prophet of the Old Testament could not cross the finish line by his own merit. The mediator himself desperately needed mercy. He could bring them the law, sure. He could boldly intercede for them. But he could not provide final atonement for their sins. He couldn't transform their rebellious nature, and he certainly couldn't conquer death. His limitations are glaring, and honestly, they are entirely by divine design. The need for transformation. So the crucial point is, external rules and flawed mediators alone simply cannot fix a rebellious, stubborn human heart. The entire wilderness experience exposes this desperate, screaming need for an inward transformation, something we just cannot achieve on our own. But here's the beautiful part. God doesn't just stand on the outside of our brokenness, cross his arms and shout, do better, or try harder. He knows we can't. Instead, he gives us a glorious, breathtaking promise. We see this unfold later in Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 33, where God declares, I will put my law in their inward parts and I will write it in their heart. God himself promises to miraculously intervene, to circumcise our hearts, and do exactly what no law and no flawed human mediator could ever pull off. Christ, our ultimate inheritance. Because the story of God's people absolutely does not end on the dusty plains of Moab. It points directly, undeniably, to the ultimate mediator. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive, eternal distinction we have to make. On one side of history, we have Moses mediating the law, faithful as a servant in God's house. But on the other side, we have Christ, establishing the new covenant in his own blood. He isn't just a servant, he is the ultimate sinless son presiding over the house. Moses could only tell people what righteousness looked like. Jesus actively fulfills that righteousness, and then he freely gives it to us. The contrasts here are just stunning. Moses dies on a mountain, merely looking at the promised land from a distance. His ministry comes to a firm, tragic end. But Jesus Christ, he actually enters the wilderness of our world, faces our temptations, goes to the cross, and then completely shatters the grave. Christ rises. He conquers death itself and reigns forever as the absolute guarantee of our eternal inheritance. Moses led a people to an earthly border, but Jesus leads his people all the way into eternal rest. So, I have a question for you as we look back at all this history. Are we destined to repeat the wilderness? When you look at the giants in your own life, the terrifying circumstances, the bad medical reports, financial crises, the overwhelming anxieties, where does your ultimate confidence rest? Are you looking at your circumstances and making them bigger than God's promises, just like that generation at Kadesh Barnea? Are you trying to rely on your own greatness, your own law-keeping, your own frail attempts to be good enough? I want to really encourage you today, let go of that impossible burden. Our confidence can never, ever rest in our own performance. It has to rest entirely in the astonishing character of God. God has definitively revealed his love and his unfailing faithfulness in Jesus Christ. Even when we are faithless, he remains faithful. So don't stare at the rules in despair, and don't obsess over your own failures. Behold the faithful Son. See your need for grace, rest entirely in his finished work, and walk boldly forward by the power of his Spirit. Because the grand canonical story does not end at a grave with Moses. It ends in a garden with an empty tomb and a resurrected king. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep in mind, this has just been a summary discussion of a deeply rich topic. If you want to dive even deeper into this incredible history and theology, a link to the fuller discussion is right down there in the description below. Until next time, remember the faithful God who brought you here, and keep looking to Christ.